Hello, I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, and welcome to the last KRAD COVID reading for 2020. Yes, it's the last one, at least for a while. When I started this series back in March, when my wife, Ren Sims, and I decided to do a dramatic reading of my Dragon Precinct short story, Brotherly Love, I didn't really anticipate that it would grow into this. But I also figured that I would run out of short stories before we would run out of pandemic. That proved optimistic, because what I'm going to read for you for this final installment of 2020 is The Fall of Iaron, which is the last short story I have to read. There are only two of my works of short fiction, very short fiction, that have not made it into this series. One is Used to Be, which I did as part of a different pandemic series. The anthology that Used to Be was in, Across the Universe, had its own little reading series that co-editor Randy Dawn did, so I read Used to Be for that. That is in the playlists for both fantasy stories and Dragon Precinct stories, so you can still find it there in this channel. And a couple of other readings I did elsewise have shown up here as well that I've done over the last several months. But the only other story that I have not included is another Dragon Precinct story called The Gorvangan Rampages, which I crowdfunded at the end of last year, and one of the crowdfund rewards is an audio reading of it, and I don't want to spoil the value of that by providing it for free here on the YouTube channel. So I may, down the line, come back and read it just to be complete about it. But for the time being, at least, I'm not going to include the Gorvangan Rampages. So, all we've got left is The Fall of Iaron, which also was a crowdfunded story, which for which an audio was a free reward. But at this point, it's been a while. It's been long enough that I feel comfortable doing it here. Before I get to the reading, there's a couple things I'd just like to say. I will probably bring this back in 2021. I've still got some novellas that I can read along the same lines as Enterprises of Great Pitch and Moment. They were done as original ebooks for the Star Trek Starfleet Corps of Engineers series, and I've got a bunch of those I could theoretically read. So I may do that. I also may read chapters and scenes from my longer works of fiction, not the whole thing, but bits and pieces from various novels over the years. Scenes that I like. And I also have some essays that I may do readings of just because I'm quite proud of them. I've been running a ton of work for doing a ton of work for Tor.com, as well as essays for various series like the Outside In series, the Smart Pop series, the Subterranean Blue Grotto series, which I actually read one of earlier in this reading series. It's been a lot of fun doing this. I've really enjoyed it. I hope that my viewers have gotten similar enjoyment out of it. And wow, that's uncomfortable. This hasn't exactly been a high-tech production. It's basically me and my iPad sitting here in front of a bunch of books, a bunch of action figures, my microwave, my television, and the occasional cat. But I've really been enjoying it. I hope that in this completely horrible year that these readings have brought you some enjoyment. And like I said, it'll likely continue in some form in 2021. But for now, I'm going to take a break for the rest of the year. One other thing, I want to once again pimp my Patreon, because my Patreon is awesome. You get, for $20 a month, you get the following stuff. A movie review per month. Anywhere between 1 and 5 TV show reviews per month. Many, 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 many cat pictures. A weekly excerpt from my work in progress. And if you jump on right now, the work in progress is going to be my next Brown Gold novel, which is what I'm working on right now. So this would be a great time to do that for that alone. You get monthly vignettes featuring my original characters, and you get first looks at my first drafts. Whenever I complete a short story or a chapter of a book, you will get to see the raw, unedited first draft. That's for $20 a month. For less money than that, you can get some of those things. $1 a month gets you just the movie reviews. $2 a month gets you the movie reviews and the cat pictures. $5 a month gets you the movie reviews, the TV reviews, and the cat pictures. $7 a month gets you all that stuff plus the weekly excerpts of my works in progress. $10 a month gets you all that stuff plus the monthly vignettes. And then 20 gets you also the first looks at first drafts. So please consider supporting me on Patreon. It's a really big help, especially these days. It's not very expensive. And it's at patreon.com/KRAD, KRAD. Enough of that. The Fall of Iaron is a story I actually originally wrote for a short story anthology that wound up never being published. Jonathan Mayberry was putting together an anthology called Kingdoms Fall, which was very specifically about fantasy stories about kingdoms falling, basically. The problem is the small press to which Jonathan sold the anthology then went out of business. These things happen. So the story was kind of left flapping in the breeze. I did submit it to one magazine who rejected it. So I decided, what the heck, I've done this with other short stories, let me just go the crowdfund route with it. And I did, and it proved to be quite successful, as most of the stories I have crowdfunded have done. This takes place in the same universe as the Dragon Precinct stories, but it does not involve the Cliff's End Castle Guard at all. In fact, there's only going to be one or two familiar characters here. But it's about the history of Flingaria, the world in which Dragon Precinct and its sequels and short stories take place. And here it is. The Fall of Iaron. The day of Iaron's fall. Colonel Alvar ran his sword through his opponent's chest, adding to the bloodstains on his blade. As his foe fell, he looked around the plateau to see that the soldiers belonging to Baron Ametisz had either fallen or surrendered. "The Baron's forces have been defeated!" cried Colonel Thomby from the edge of the plateau. Alvar feared he might fall over and down the mountain. Alvar saw that he and Thomby were accounted for, and after a moment he saw the bodies of the other five colonels. Many more corpses littered the plateau as well as the incline up which they had charged. Thousands of troops lay dead on the battlements. Of General Slaanee, he saw no sign. "Where's the general?" he asked Thomby. "He continued with a regiment to the castle." Nodding, Alvar said, "Then let us join him and end this once and for all." Iaron had long been one of the most defensible positions in all Flingaria. The redoubt had been constructed atop a massive plateau on the Tserin Peak, and Baron Ametisz had gloated that he would never be removed from his throne. As Alvar and Thomby led their surviving troops toward the castle at the plateau's center, he raised his sword and cried, "For victory!" The few troops that were left all raised their swords as well, and cheered as they ran ahead. But as they approached the battlements, they saw General Slaanee exit through the portcullis. His armor, like that of everyone else, was drenched in blood, and both his hands were full. In one hand was his broadsword, in the other, a severed head. "Behold," Slaanee held up the head up before his people, "the Baron who claimed that he would never be defeated, the fool who declared himself invincible, the imbecile who dared to take our people prisoner and refused to release them, instead consigning them to his mines. Today, these people are avenged. Today, we have defeated the undefeatable. Today, I give you the head of Baron Ametisz." Alvar and the rest of the survivors screamed their approval. 2 weeks later, Alvar led the procession back to Treemark to report to Baron Alamgord. The surviving troops, as well as what was left of their support staff, paraded through Treemark to cheering crowds. When they reached the throne room, most of the troops left to reunite with their loved ones, or bring tokens of those who had fallen to their families. Alvar himself went through the double doors to see Baron Alamgord and Baroness Taylor sitting in their matching thrones atop a dais. Attendants surrounded them, scantily clad women next to the Baroness, scantily clad men next to the Baron, and a page boy announced his arrival. Several men and women of the nobility, Alvar did not know their names as they did not associate with such as him, stood at either side of the room. "Colonel Alvar Simgranta," the page boy said. The Baron smiled his toothless smile. Alvar couldn't help but wince. Ever since the Baroness had angered the court wizard, magic had been hard to come by, even simple dental spells. "Welcome, Colonel, though surely that will soon be General." "Now, Alan," the Baroness said in a mock chiding tone, At least, Alvar assumed it was mock chiding. "Let us not presume to speak for General Slaanee. He will make his promotion decisions at the right time." "Indeed." The Baron touched his wife's hand, and then regarded Alvar. "Besides, speaking for the General is your task, Colonel. Please, provide a detailed report on the successful campaign at Iaron." Alvar blinked. "A detailed report?" "Of course. Well, the messenger came with the basics, but he said only that Slaanee stormed Iaron and killed that tiresome fool Ametisz. But we must know the details." "Yes," the Baroness added. "How did you storm the battlements? How did you defeat Ametiz's forces when he had the higher ground? And how did Slaanee take his head?" Nervously, Alvar swallowed. He decided to focus on the portion he could answer, which was the former part. So he cleared his throat and began to speak. "As you know, my lord and lady, Iaron's position atop the plateau makes it one of the easiest places in Flingaria to defend. Many have tried to storm its gates, and all have failed. Baron Ametiz's forces could stand atop the incline of the peak and pick off any invaders at their leisure." Waving her hand, the Baroness said, "Yes, Colonel, we are aware of this. As you said, we already knew, and we would have been content to allow Ametisz to keep his little mountain kingdom until he started to kidnap our people for his mines. And so we tasked General Slaanee with finding a way to defeat him." Yes." Alvar cleared his throat. "General Slaanee decided that the secret was to bring so many soldiers that it would negate the advantage of higher ground. Noble scouts learned the numbers of Ametiz's army, and Slaanee knew that your lordship's standing forces would be insufficient to the task. And so he went to the people, to the family of those whom Ametisz had taken, not just from here, but also from Barlin and Valessa and Cliff's End, and recruited enough troops that we traveled to Iaron with an army that was triple that of Ametiz's." The Baroness rolled her eyes. "We know this part, Colonel. Tell us of the campaign." "Of course, my lady. The new recruits took the lead when we reached the base of the peak, eager to exact their revenge on the foul tyrant who had taken their loved ones. As we climbed the incline, Ametiz's archers tried to pick us off, as they had many other invaders. Indeed, many did fall, but for each noble soldier who died, 10 more took his place. As General Slaanee had foreseen in his brilliance, Ametiz's archers ran out of arrows before we ran out of soldiers." Nodding, the Baroness glanced at her husband. "I did tell you that those trade embargoes would work in our favor." "My lady?" Alvar asked, confused. "Iaron has very little wood left, as what few trees they had were razed to support Ametiz's mining, so they must acquire wood in trade. We, and several other human barons, have embargoed trade to Iaron, and the elves have respected the embargo and refused to sell their wood to Iaron. It has left their supply lines dwindled, which is why the archers who faced you ran out of arrows." Blinking, Alvar said, "Yes, my lady," for lack of anything better to say. He didn't see what that had to do with anything. "Please, Colonel," the Baron said quickly, "continue your tale." "Yes, my lord." Now Alvar started to pace before the thrones, as he had seen bards do, throwing himself into the telling of the story. "Though many of our soldiers had fallen, we jumped over their bodies and leapt into the fray. So long had it been since Ametiz's troops had fought hand-to-hand rather than with bow and arrow that it seemed they had forgotten how. Though the battle was hard fought, we were victorious." This time it was the Baron who waved his hand dismissively. "What about Slaanee and Ametisz? I wish to hear of how the General vanquished the Baron." Alvar hesitated, but only for a moment. His Baron had given him an order, and he would obey it. "While I and the other colonels finished off the ground forces outside the castle, General Slaanee led a regiment into the castle itself. Ametiz's elite guards stood at the portcullis to repel them, but they were no match for the righteous fury of our soldiers." Alvar at least assumed that the elite guard had been at the castle gates. He didn't recall seeing their bodies, but there was a good deal of chaos, and besides, everyone knew that Ametisz never went anywhere without his elite guard surrounding him. Ametisz stood fast before his golden throne. Slaanee held his blade up high and declared, "Yield, Baron! Your soldiers have fallen, your city is ours. Yield now or taste the blade of my sword." "Never!" the Baron cried. "No one has ever unseated a Baron from this throne by force since the death of Tsarin, and I refuse to be the first." "Know this, Baron," the general said in reply. "This broadsword was forged by the finest swordmaster in all of Flingaria. It was created for the specific purpose of defeating you in battle. It is the greatest sword in all the land, and it has already tasted the blood of many of the fools who swore themselves to your ignoble cause. This sword is Baron's Bane, and it is destined to cleave your head from your body, unless you yield to me now. And again I say never! I am Baron Ametisz, and I shall never yield! If you would defeat me, it must be in combat. Let us see if your Baron's Bane may live up to its presumptuous name. And so the two soldiers clashed. It was an epic battle that raged across the throne room. Our noble soldiers watched in awe as these two great warriors were locked in combat. Baron's Bane slammed against Ametiz's shield. Ametiz's sword swung towards Slaanee's head. On and on the battle continued until, at last, Ametisz was weakened by Slaanee's onslaught and was unable to raise his shield in time. Baron's Bane sliced through Ametiz's shoulder. The Baron's cry was great indeed, but his wails of agony were soon silenced, as Slaanee raised Baron's Bane up high and cried, "For Treemark, for Baron Alemgord, for Baroness Taylor, and for all those whom you unjustly imprisoned and enslaved." And then with one mighty swing, Baron's Bane did sever Ametiz's repugnant head from his foul body. With one mighty swing, the many dead slaves in Iaron's mines were avenged. With one mighty swing, Iaron's legend of never being conquered was ended. Alvar looked at the Baron and Baroness and saw that they were rapt with attention. Alemgord seemed to be having trouble catching his breath. "Truly," Baroness Taylor said, "General Slaanee is the finest soldier in the land." "He must return to us, that he may be properly rewarded for his victory," Baron Alemgord added. "When I departed Iaron, the general informed me that he would require at least another month to restore order." Alvar hesitated, then added in a conspiratorial tone, "I believe that the general is hoping that your lordships will grant him governorship of the city-state under your rule." In fact, Alvar believed no such thing. However, he had just made Slaanee out to be such a great hero that the general might remain chief of staff forever. The Baroness's words in particular made that clear. Alvar himself would never be promoted unless the hero of Iaron was out of the way, and he himself had damaged his own chances in his eagerness to give his lordships the story they wanted. "I believe," Baron Alemgord said with a twinkle in his eye, "that could be arranged." Alvar smiled and took a very low bow. "As the Baron commands." Excuse me. 10 years later. Helps if you swallow down the right pipe. 10 years later. The caravan arrived at Iaron on the day it was scheduled, for which Emrys was grateful. She was concerned that, were she late, Sarafan would sell the store to someone else. She had upended her entire life to move here from Treemark in order to take over Sarafan's store. The horses all came to a stop at the base of the peak, right at the newly completed pathway that led to the plateau. Emrys muttered, "How did people get to Iaron before the pathway was built?" Maggie, the caravan leader, chuckled, brushing a lock of brown hair under the headscarf that covered the tapered ears of her elven heritage. "With great difficulty. Oh, there had been other pathways up top, but they were narrow and difficult. That was how the Baron wanted it back in the day." Frowning, Emrys asked, "Why did Baron Alemgord want Iaron to be hard to get to?" "No, I speak of Baron Ametisz, the former ruler of Iaron." That surprised Emrys. "There was another ruler?" Maggie nodded. "Oh, yes. Until about a decade ago, Iaron was a separate city-state from Treemark, ruled by Baron Ametisz with an iron fist. At least until the great General Slaanee conquered him on Baron Alemgord's behalf." Vaguely, Emrys recalled hearing stories about Slaanee in taverns, but she'd never paid them much mind. "The horses need to rest before we go up the pathway," Maggie added, "so allow me to tell you the tale of Slaanee's triumph." If they weren't going to move anyhow, Emrys wouldn't mind hearing a story. Besides, if she was going to live in Iaron, it couldn't hurt to know the history of the place. "I'd love to hear it." "Iaron was first built on the Tserin Peak, so named for the great wizard who used the mountain as his redoubt. Centuries ago, Tserin fought a mighty battle against another wizard, Dovros the Cruel. Tserin died in that fight, but the day was won as their magics sundered the mountaintop, leaving a giant plateau in its wake. In honor of Tserin, his greatest acolyte, Iaron, ordered a mighty castle be built on the plateau. The castle was named for Iaron, as was the plateau itself, as it became a haven for people escaping the dwarf tyranny." "Fascinating," Emrys said. She hadn't known any of this. She just knew Iaron was a city on a big plateau. When Dwarven forces tried to reclaim their human slaves who had taken asylum in Iaron, they were rebuffed easily, for the humans had higher ground. The foolish dwarves were the first to try to conquer Iaron, but they were far from the last. However, until Slaanee, they all met with the same result. What did Slaanee do? It was what Ametisz did that prompted the attack, Maggie said. For just as Iaron became a city by being a haven for escaped slaves, now, centuries later, agents of Iaron went out into Flingaria to take slaves to work in the mines that had been dug into the peak. Confident that no retribution would harm him from his position atop the plateau, Ametisz brazenly kidnapped hundreds to work in his mines. Baron Alamgord and Baroness Taylor, Emrys gestured. May Gandura grant her safe passage to the afterlife. The Baroness's death had been a devastating blow to all the human lands. Maggie glared at Emrys for a moment before continuing. They refused to simply send troops in a suicidal attack. They tasked General Slaanee to come up with an invasion plan that had a chance of success. The general chose not to bring larger forces, but instead to attack alone. Oh, he did gather a small army to fool Ametisz into thinking he would be attacked, but even as his soldiers lay siege to the mountain from its base, Slaanee snuck out under cover of darkness. He climbed the mountain alone, armed only with his mighty broadsword, Baron's Bane. Isn't that sword on display at the castle? Nodding, Maggie said, You should definitely go see it once you've settled in. It's an amazing blade. In any case, he stormed Iaron's castle at night and challenged Ametisz to single combat. Ametisz agreed, and they clashed for 7 days and 7 nights. But in the end, there was no doubt as to the victor. Baron's Bane had been forged for the express purpose of cleaving Ametiz's head from his body, which it did with a mighty strike. Emrys stared, open-mouthed. How had I never heard this story before? Well, now you have. What happened to Slaanee after that? He ruled Iaron for but a month, and then was felled by an illness that spread through all of Iaron. Half the population died before a wizard worked with a healer to create a cure. Wow! Emrys chuckled. Thank you, Maggie. That was an amazing story. I promise, every word of it is true. 50 years later. Judy led the group of dwarf children through the portcullis into Iaron Castle. The human king and queen had generously allowed Judy to bring the children of several important dwarf families on a tour of the human lands. They had already visited Valessa, then came here. After Iaron, they would travel to Barlin, then to Treemark, then to Cliff's End, and then sail the Garriman Sea back home. He knew a group of children of human nobility were making a similar journey through the dwarven homelands. They had been hoping to convince those snotty elves to participate, but the new elf queen refused. She brought the children to the centerpiece of the castle's atrium, a large glass display. This, she said as the children gathered in a semicircle around the case, is the great broadsword Baron Bane, which was used to take Iaron from the slaver Baron Ametisz. The great human general, Slaanee, wielded this sword as he led his armies up the grand pathway that leads from the base of Tseren's Peak to the plateau on which Iaron stands, the same pathway that we came up this morning. Along the way, he and his 200 soldiers faced many of Ametiz's forces, but vanquished them all. When he arrived at the top of the plateau, his 200 men faced off against Ametiz's elite guard, the finest soldiers in all the human lands. One of the youths spoke up. But not as good as dwarf soldiers! Several of the children laughed, and Judy chuckled as well. No, of course not. But that goes without saying, does it not? That why you didn't say it? Another child asked. Indeed. Now then, if I may be permitted to finish. The children's laughter grew silent, and they again paid rapt attention to Judy's story. Slaanee's 200 soldiers engaged the elite guard, but while they did so, the general himself entered the castle and challenged Ametisz to a duel. One of the children interrupted. I heard that he had a wizard make Baron Bane so it would only kill Ametisz. Another cried out, I heard that they sent 300 men to die as a first wave before attacking. I heard that they fought for 7 days and 7 nights. Judy shook his head. He sometimes despaired of the youth of today. All those are fanciful nonsense. No wizards operated in human lands during that time, as Baron Alemgord had a falling out with the court wizard, and the Brotherhood of Wizards declared all human lands off limits. Slaanee was a hero, not a brute. Never would he have considered sending soldiers simply to die. In fact, Slaanee didn't even take all his forces, only selecting a small few whom he trusted to win the day. As for fighting for 7 days and 7 nights, that may sound pretty when bards sing of it, but it is not truly possible. Most sword fights only last a few minutes. Having said that, I will say this much. Baron Bane was indeed forged with the express purpose of cleaving Ametiz's head from his body, and that Slaanee did do. Now then, let us move on to the garden. "75 years later. Medin waved at Cheryl as she entered the Dog and Duck. She immediately walked over and sat on one of the other 2 stools that surrounded the small table. "It's good to see you, Cheryl. How is my favorite archivist?" "Going broke from having to buy new sight spells every year. They keep getting more expensive the worse my eyes get." She shrugged. "The difficulties of spending my day peering at old scrolls, I suppose. How's my favorite bard? Enjoy your vacation?" "It was very nice to spend an entire month on Sapter Isle without once telling a story. However, I'm ready to start working again. Hope you have something new for me." "Well, as it happens, we just received a huge donation of scrolls from the Celtric family in Iaron. It includes a fragment from the diary kept by one of General Slaanee's batmen." Medin's eyes widened. "You're kidding! Slaanee's 12-day sword fight against Baron Ametisz was one of the first stories I learned. In fact, I think it was one of the first I performed solo after my apprenticeship." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the worn wooden table. "For Wyatt's sake, I don't think I've actually told it in years. I love it, though. After centuries of armies trying and failing to scale the peak, it was Slaanee climbing the mountain all alone, armed only with Baron Bane, the sword Treemark's wizard had blessed with the might to cleave Ametiz's head from his body." He shook his head. Sorry, got lost in nostalgia. It really has been a while since I told it." "Well, if you do tell it again, you may need to change some things. According to the dates on the diary, it wasn't a 12-day battle. In fact, it only lasted 1 day. One morning, the Batman is writing about how Treemark's entire standing army arrived at the base of Tseren's Peak, and the entry dated the next day is after the army's victory with Ametisz beheaded." "Wait, the entire army? He didn't go with just his best soldiers?" "Not according to this diary. There's lots of complaining about provisioning so many people." "Huh." Medin shrugged. "Well, I never really thought the battle took 12 days in any case, and having the whole army there makes sense. Besides, it doesn't change the story much. The army takes on Ametiz's forces while Slaanee faces the Baron alone. But here's the really interesting part. According to what he wrote, Slaanee conscripted an extra 500 soldiers from Treemark, Valessa, Barlin, and Cliff's End." Medin blinked. "So he bought the battle with 700 troops? No, wait. He took his whole army." "Exactly. There were 2,000 soldiers altogether. What Slaanee did, this was how he really won the day, was go to the families of the people who'd been captured and enslaved by Ametisz and recruit from them. They were more than willing to lead the charge, and the Baron's archers picked them all off. According to the Batman, only 24 of those 500 survived. But then they ran out of arrows, and then the real soldiers were able to mount a successful attack." For several seconds, Medin just stared at the archivist. Then he grabbed his flagon of ale and took a massive gulp. "Well, looks like I won't be telling that story again anytime soon." Cheryl frowned. "Why not? This makes the story more interesting." "No, it doesn't! It makes Slaanee out to be a total bastard. I mean, come on, sending the families of people who were enslaved in the mines to their deaths? I can't tell a story about a person who does that." "Aren't you the one who is always telling me that you want your stories to be accurate?" "Well, I do, but it still has to be a good story." "So you're going to lie?" Medin shook his head. "No, I'm just not going to tell it. Not with that stuff in it. Totally ruins it. Is there anything in there about the sword fight?" Cheryl nodded. "Yes, we've been getting the name of the sword wrong. It's Baron's Bane, not Baron Bane. Oh, and if it was blessed by a mage, the Batman never mentions it. But he does mention something about how there's no court wizard." "Really? Huh, wow, okay." "He also says that they attacked by climbing the peak, not by taking the pathway." "Why wouldn't they take the pathway?" Shrugging, Cheryl said, "How would I know? Maybe they thought it was too obvious." Medin sighed, and then took another gulp of his ale. "Yeah, I think I'm better off just avoiding it." Now Cheryl grinned. What if someone requests it? Nobody's requested it in years. Honestly, since the Elven Wars, and with Gan Brightblade, Altharloth Sirhans, and now the Pirate Queen dying, they're all anyone wants to hear about. There's no call for the older stories. Cheryl just stared at him. Fine. If someone requests it, I'll just talk about the sword fight. She grinned. 12 days and 12 nights? Maybe I'll limit it to 1 day. But have it be the epic sword battle that you know it just had to be. I mean, come on. Ametisz was always boasting about his prowess with the sword. And even if the court wizard didn't magic it up, Baron Bane, or I guess Baron's Bane, was still forged with the express purpose of taking Ametiz's head off. That's the stuff of legends right there. Even if Slaanee was a bastard? Cheryl asked. Medin grinned. Ametisz was a bigger bastard. The day of Iaron's fall. General Slaanee Sim Willem entered the castle of Iaron with his broadsword gripped in his right hand. He barely was able to carry the blessed thing, but the smith had assured him that it would cut through a human neck with a single stroke. And while he had yet to test it on an actual neck, it did quite well against plenty of shoulders and torsos and legs this day. Behind him were a small regiment of his most trusted soldiers. These 12 were the only ones whom he expected to survive out of the whole bunch. His long-term goal was to have them replace Alvar, Thambi, and all the other imbecile colonels the Baron and Baroness had saddled him with. Short-term, they would deal with Ametiz's so-called elite guard. The first part of his plan had worked beautifully. With the embargo, Ametiz's supply of arrows for his archers was low. So Slaanee negated their high ground advantage with 500 useless soldiers with visions of vengeance dancing in their heads. They were handy targets for the arrows, and their deaths allowed the real soldiers, such as they were, to storm the battlements. With luck, most of them would die, leaving the way clear for Slaanee to use his hand-picked troops for the third part of his plan. Now, though, he had the second part to deal with, the elite guard and Ametisz himself. As they turned a corner into the atrium, 7 men in red armor stood before them. "So you are the elite guard," Slaanee said. The one in the center, the only one with insignia on his armor, stepped forward. Like all of them, his sword was sheathed. "We have no quarrel with you, General." "I find that hard to believe, given why I'm here." The leader said, "It's not why you're here. It's what you've done while you're here. The Baron's army is basically gone. It's possible we could defeat your people here, but unlikely, and even if we could, there are dozens more outside the castle." Then the leader smiled. "Besides, we haven't been paid in a month, thanks to the embargo. So the hell with the Baron. We go with the winner." "Good!" Slaanee's arm was hurting from hauling around Baron's Bane's weight, and he wasn't eager to have to lift it again. "Join my men and secure the castle. Is Ametisz in his throne room?" "Cowering under the throne, probably," the leader said. "Come on, you lot. Let's go help these good men secure the castle." The elite guard and Slaanee's own soldiers moved to carry out his orders, while the general proceeded into the throne room. Slaanee saw the throne, a small brown chair with torn purple upholstery, but nothing else in the room. Had the leader lied to him? A thin, reedy voice said, "Stay back! Stay back!" Then a great deal of coughing. "I am General Slaanee Sim Willem of Treemark. I've come to make you an offer, Baron Ametisz." "I want no offer from you, General. I want you gone." Slaanee smiled. "That will not happen, Baron. My offer is simple. Either you capitulate to me and I will let you live and serve as my advisor while I rule Iaron, or you will die by my hand shortly." Ametisz climbed out from behind the throne. He was pale and covered with sweat, and he was unarmed. "Me as advisor? I doubt that Baron Alemgord will stand for that." "He will have no choice. His entire army came with me to take Iaron. Only a few soldiers stayed behind to protect Treemark, and I will send a few of the idiots back and keep the finest soldiers for myself. They, along with the survivors among your troops, will make a fine army to defend this most defensible position. Within 2 months, I intend to claim Iaron as my own, and then take Treemark, Valessa, and Barlin, Valessa and Barlin and Cliff's End will fall soon thereafter, and I will rule all the human lands." Stumbling toward Slaanee, Ametisz started coughing again. When he finished, he said, "It matters little. This consumptive illness will kill me ere long. Besides, my only advice is to find a way to construct your own arrows so you do not need to depend on outsiders for them." Slaanee chuckled. "Worry not, Baron, for I will be considered an ally, and Treemark will end the embargo. Once we have regrouped and resupplied Iaron, then we will strike." He stared down at the pale figure before him. As for you, since you'll die in any case... Sure enough, the blade did slice straight through Ametiz's neck with one stroke, just like the smith had promised. It was a pity. He was hoping the Baron would see reason, but he obviously was addled with his illness. And at least he got to test Baron's bane. In truth, he had not had it forged for Ametiz at all, for he was hoping to have the erstwhile ruler of the plateau as his ally and confidant. No. He had had this heavy broadsword forged in the hopes that he would be able to use it on Alamgord and Taylor. In a mere 2 months' time, possibly sooner, if everything went according to plan, Baron's bane would again serve its function. Besides, taking Ametiz's head out to the battlements would no doubt make a fantastic story. The Fall of Iaron is not currently available in any form, unless you supported the Kickstarter I did for it a couple of years ago. But if you supported the Kickstarter, then you've already got it. Having said that, I do have under contract a short story collection called More Tales from Dragon Precinct, and while this isn't technically a Dragon Precinct story, I'm probably going to include it as part of that collection. And if not, it may wind up somewhere else someday. We'll see. But for now, this is the only way to get it if you didn't support that Kickstarter. So I hope you enjoyed it. Consider it an exclusive. Thank you all very much for watching this channel throughout the coronavirus craziness. Thank you very much for subscribing. If any of you went to support my Patreon, thank you for that. If you didn't support my Patreon, well, why not? Please have a wonderful holiday. 2021 has to be better than 2020 was, although I probably jinxed it just by saying that. I hope that these readings of my short fiction helped you get through it. If you want to check me out online, you can go to DeCandido.net. If you want to buy any of my works of fiction, you can probably get them from whatever your online book dealer of choice is. If you go to DeCandido.net, there's a link to a list of the books that I personally have for sale that I will autograph for you and send to you. You can also get a lot of them through all the usual online book dealers, Amazon.com, BN.com, Kobo. Some of them are available on Smashwords, not all of them. But Kobo has most of them in ebook form, and both Barnes & Noble and Amazon have a lot of them. And also a lot of the other books. Apple Books should have the ebooks of most of my work. You can read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com, and again, my Patreon is patreon.com/KRAD. Again, thank you all so much for watching. Have a wonderful holiday. Please, please stay safe. Wear a mask. Wash your hands. Stay away from people. We're coming, hopefully, to the end of this pandemic with the vaccine on the horizon, but we're not out of the woods yet. So please, be safe, be careful, and have a happy new year. And I'm sure be back with more in 2021. Take care.